And we're live again. Day 13 of my live video challenge. Back to the usual format today. If you didn't see it yesterday, I did a live video with my friend Vincent. It was actually his video and I joined him live. And he ended up almost, it was a conversation, but he almost ended up interviewing me, which I thought was really fun. Maybe I'll try that one more time. Maybe I'll do the interview next time or invite someone else. I've actually already made a few invitations. We'll see if anyone wants to join me. Yeah, so that was day 12. Today's day 13, and starting a little later than usual today. It's around, I think, about 9 p.m. here now. I just came back home from dinner with my dad, which was cool. 4 of us had dinner, and it just kind of got me thinking, something that I've thought about a lot in the past, but we were talking about just like, he was telling some of his old stories from, way before I was born, growing up and stuff like that. And just the way history repeats itself, it's a common joke in my family and between the two of us that, I'm a lot like him, and in the micro kind of ways, like body language, sometimes facial expressions and things like that, and even the way like we finish dinner and like push all the plates out of the way, or tend to be impatient with people sometimes. So we're similar in that sense. But also, when I was growing up, when I got to like a certain age that, you start thinking about career and what do you want to do with your life, I think the very obvious choice was to go into the restaurant business. That was the family business. That's what I grew up around. I spent time in the restaurants when I was a kid. I remember going to my dad's restaurant like after school and just sitting there mesmerized watching chef like pin bone a fish or something like that. And that was my choice. That's where I liked hanging out. And I always had an interest in the industry. I have a passion for food to this day. I love it. And it's something that I strongly considered and still consider. It's sort of like very close to my heart. But at the time, being, 16, 18, going into university and sort of deciding what you want to do with your life, I made a very conscious decision not to go into food and beverage or hospitality. And again, not because I didn't like it, but I felt a strong need to like differentiate myself, especially at that time. I mean, my dad, I would say, has like a strong personality, and I do too. So there's some potential for clash there. I would say he's really mellow these days, but when you're running a bunch of restaurants, there's like a certain attitude that goes with that and getting things done, and I knew that was going to create some clash. But more than that, I think it was just like for my own ego, for the sake of, I don't want to say like I felt like I lived under his shadow or something, but I felt like I would have had I followed him into the same career. And any success that I had, any failure would have been my failure, but any success that I would have had would have been, oh, well, you were set up. And I don't mean that necessarily coming from like my family, but just in general, like maybe even just my own ego or my self-telling that like, oh, well, you were successful because someone handed it to you. You didn't make your own way. You weren't, you didn't do it all by yourself. Someone gave you what you have, and that's why you're successful. And I couldn't really live with that. So for me, it was always like, go, make it, so to speak, on your own. And then, if you're still interested in that, if you want to, go into restaurants or hospitality, hotels, whatever, you always can do that later on. But I was passionate also about computers and IT and all of that at that time, especially growing up, kind of coming of age right around, 16 to 18 was like the first .com bubble boom and then bust. But so, being that age around that time, like that was really what I wanted to get into and what I did. But I mention all this, one, like not wanting to follow my dad into the same space for all those reasons, but sort of jokingly because you still end up the same person that you are, like either way, whether you make those choices or not. And so I said before about like mannerisms and just different ways and decisions and things that we do that it's like, I'm very obviously my dad's son. And we were even talking today about my grandfather. who passed away when I was pretty young. I have a few kind of weak memories from when I was that young, but not a lot. Most of what I remember are the stories that we tell afterwards. And so we were, telling some more of those stories too. And it's just funny to hear like my grandfather sounds a lot like my dad, sounds a lot like me in some ways. And I'm okay with that. I mean, I celebrate that. But you think about the choices that you do make. And again, I mentioned the one, like, not consciously choosing not to follow the same career path, but in the same way that they say, like, a fish doesn't detect the water, it's just normal. There are so many other things along the same way in my own life, and I think in everyone's, where like you don't even see that it could be something different. Like you don't realize that that's not the only path. So to be more specific, like in my case, sure, it was clear to me that like I could make a name for myself if I didn't get into restaurants, but it was still like a foregone conclusion that I would get into business of some kind. I never seriously considered being like an artist or a doctor or any of those things. Like it was very clear that I should be, and not because anyone forced me to, but it was just like innate, like, oh, you're an entrepreneur, like you're a business person. You're going to start and run businesses. You might not start with that, but at some point you'll do that. And those are the things that I think are sort of fun to explore, especially if you're doing kind of different personal development work. One of the things that comes up often is like, you talk about strengths and weaknesses, and a lot of times we spend time focusing on our weaknesses and, what do you want to overcome and different challenges and blind spots you have. But another element of it is focusing on your strengths. And one way that you can sort of learn or evaluate your own strengths, or to see what are the things that come easy for you or come naturally, or what are the things that I've heard someone describe it as, like, if you walked into a bookstore, where do you gravitate in terms of like your interests? What could you just talk about all day, read about all day? What are the things that other people find difficult that you don't? And in that sense, it's funny because there are certain things that, again, for me, I just sort of saw growing up as normal. And there isn't really a normal. There's only normal for me, normal for you. There isn't really like a global normal. So in my case, normal was always trying to make money somehow. I always had a scheme, and it was only when I got a lot older, like well into my 20s, and met and hung out with a more diverse group of people, as opposed to like family and the immediate friends that I grew up with, that I started to uncover, like, wait a minute, other kids didn't do this stuff. And it's not about bragging. It's just funny, like looking back on it now, there were a lot of things that, like, as I said, I just considered so normal. I started a newspaper that in my room that was called Andrew's Room News. My mom still has copies of it somewhere, where I sat on our Mac Plus, like ancient Macintosh, the first computer that we had, and the only computer that we had until it was like hilariously ancient. Like other kids would laugh at how old that thing was, but I had that computer. It was a Mac Plus, and I would write just whatever was going on, like what I learned in school that week, and whether the Redskins won and what the score was and all of that. And I would just type up this newspaper and then print one copy of it out, and then cut it up into little like columns and make like a front page, and then photocopy that on the fax machine that we had, which was the only way I had to make a photocopy. And it would spit out this like hilarious thermal paper that would scroll up together, and it just like, it was completely ridiculous. And I sold it, but the only audience for it was, of course, my parents and my sister. So I sold it effectively to my parents. And there was even one issue included a survey that also my mom still has, that we were laughing at not too long ago. And in the survey, I asked, like, what would you like to see more of? Sports, like stories from school, whatever the options were. And I don't know exactly how old I was. I want to say I'm somewhere around like 10 years old at this point, that I'm selling these newspapers in the house, that I'm writing and printing at home. And the survey included a question like, what would you like to see more of? And something like, what other suggestions do you have for us? And I think I was selling the newspaper for 50 cents. And I actually went as far as selling subscriptions, because I wanted, I wanted to earn the recurring revenue, the holy grail, right? Get money up front, and then I would have more money, and I could go and produce more newspapers and stuff. So I was trying to get money. And the second question of what other suggestions you have, my sister wrote something like, you have zero cost of production, so the price should be free. Like you're using, our home computer, whatever. Like, and this is the one that my mom still has that I was reading not too long ago, and I responded something hilarious for a 10-year-old, like, this isn't communism. The cost of production does not dictate the price. Something really crazy like that. And again, at the time for me as a 10-year-old, that's what I knew. Like that to me just seemed completely normal. And it's only as I've gotten older that I don't see that. Like if I met a 10-year-old today, I wouldn't necessarily think of that as normal. I would think that kid's like a little bit, weird and like go play with some G.I. Joes or something, man. Why are you selling newspapers? But that was just the start of it. From the newspaper business, I also tried at maybe even an earlier age, 5 or 6 or something, together with my sister and a neighbor to start a detective agency, like Scooby-Doo style. But there were no mysteries to be solved in the neighborhood. I think we probably knocked on like 5 doors and there were no mysteries to be solved. So that one went away pretty quickly. But other businesses were more serious and lasted. One of the ones that was fun, other kids, if you're watching this and you grew up in Potomac, you'll remember, or Bethesda, we had for many years the Kemper Open, which then became the AT&T National, and now I think it's like the Tiger Woods Invitational or something, a golf tournament, which would come to first Avenel and then in some years Congressional Country Club. And those were all like right around the area that we lived in. And like most sporting events and certainly golf events, parking would be really expensive, and we lived in a pretty small town, I don't know, 20, 30, 40,000 people, and it was a lot of people who would come, like thousands of people would come for the golf tournament, so like the population would swell during the week or whatever that it was on, and so we would, other kids and we would sell, some of them would do parking. I used to always sell sodas, and that was right around the time like you could start selling bottled water. And so water was cheap to buy, and you could sell it for like $2 a bottle outside the like golf tournament, and just like beyond the fence of wherever they were set up. And inside the golf tournament, like you couldn't buy or sell anything unofficially. The only place you could buy water officially was from the official concession stands, where you had really long lines, and it was something outrageous. I mean, nowadays it'd probably be like $10 a bottle. In those days it was probably like $5, and we were selling it for $2. So you'd borrow money from your parents, you'd go to the grocery store, buy 12 or 24 packs of Coke and Diet Coke and Sprite and water, and you'd get a little cooler and fill it with ice, and you'd put all the sodas in there, and then you just sit on the side of the road where people were walking from where they had to park into the golf tournament, and you'd sell them drinks. And I remember even one year we did hot dogs, and we were grilling hot dogs and selling them. That was more complicated. Drinks was easy and good, and we made each of us could make $100 or $200, maybe even a little bit more, depending. Because one year we had the U.S. Open, which was a really big tournament. It's the national championship for the United States for golf, so it was a really big tournament, and that brought like thousands and thousands of people, which was good business for us, selling drinks on the side of the road. But in a normal year, like we could make $100 or a couple of $100 in those few days, and that was good money. I used to say it was like second Christmas. You had Christmas once a year in December, and Christmas one more time in the summer when those golf tournaments were going on, and you could make that money and then go buy whatever you wanted as like a 12-year-old with $100 burning a hole in your pocket. And that was just one more example. There were a number of other businesses from there. I met Puya not too much longer after that. I would think I was 14 when we met. And God, from the beginning, we started with Sonic Boom Acoustics, which was really his and his brother and a bunch of other friends making. In those days, the thing, and I guess it's still a thing, but it was more of a thing in those days, was to make your car stereo as loud as possible. And specifically, you wanted really loud bass, right? You didn't want just like loud treble or a loud system. You wanted like a car stereo that would like shake the earth. And it used to be a thing we would drive around the parking lot. I didn't have a license or anything. I wasn't old enough yet. I was the youngest one. But whoever was driving would drive around the parking lot of the local Montgomery Mall, the local shopping mall, and you would try to set off as many car alarms as you could with your car stereo, because your stereo would be so loud that the vibrations from the bass would set off the alarms of like other cars that were parked there. That was kind of like the, you've got a really loud car stereo if you could do that. And what was funny is that the car stereo market was really big at that time, and there were all kinds of crazy speakers and subwoofers and stuff that you could buy. And just the physics of the way a subwoofer works, like it's sort of like a sealed system. You have like the speaker, sending sound waves out and whatever, and it depends on having a strong enough enclosure. And the subwoofers at that time had gotten so powerful that they were much stronger than the like speaker boxes that you would have in your car could handle. So you couldn't get like the full power out of the speaker like that. The weakness was the thing. So we started Sonic Boom Acoustics to sell stronger speaker boxes, basically stronger subwoofer boxes that you could buy. So you'd like nail together a bunch of really hard MDF or whatever wood and cut the holes for the speakers and build these like subwoofer boxes that were just like ungodly loud. I mean, you couldn't turn your stereo up enough in your car when you had one of those things in. You would like go deaf before you got it to full volume. And then you could take them. In those days, there were bass competitions. And actually the first day that Puya and I met was at a bass competition. Payam, his brother, was at, we were in school together and we had a computer class together, and we started nerding out over car stereos, and it turned out there was a bass competition coming up some weekend, so we all went together, and I was there to like, I don't know, tune the equalizer or something, and it was Puya, his brother's car, and that started it, and then it started Sonic Boom Acoustics, trying to make louder and louder music systems, and from there, it progressed to another business and another business and another business to where we are now. But I could tell those stories for a few more hours. But the main point of it all was just this idea that like at various points in my life I thought I was distinguishing myself, and really like I was already on that path before I was even old enough to know what that path was of business and entrepreneurship and wanting to create something. And wanting to create my own business and just going in that direction. No one needed to push me. And I think there are countless examples like that, in my life, in your life, in everyone's lives, where we're not aware of all the influences that are around us, especially from our parents, that you just see them doing something a certain way. And even though you on the surface kind of rebel against it and say, no, I'm not going to do it that way, you're so conditioned by what you see around you that you're already doing it. And that's fine, and we just had fun kind of talking about that tonight. So that's what I wanted to share for today, day 13. I will be back tomorrow for video day 14.